Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Heading into the month of March, many of y'all who've been rocking with the boys the last couple of years know what that means. Not only do we have spring practice coming up, we're also going to see, things pick up in a big way on the high school recruiting trail. South Carolina. This is going to be one of the more fascinating teams in terms of what they do on the recruiting trail in this 2026 class. We always say this when you're trying to take that next step as a program in South Carolina is to kind of try to put themselves in that upper echelon of the SEC year after year, not only having success on the football field, but parlaying that success to success on the recruiting trail. It's huge. And you look at South Carolina, it seems like they're doing that. I can't remember a time there's been this much buzz around South Carolina as a program, and you're seeing the high school kids kind of agree with that. You look at what they did in 2024. You look at what we think they're going to do in 2025. You look at generally the trajectory of this South Carolina program, putting a lot of talent to the NFL, developing quarterbacks the right way. It seems different. It seems different. And I think most specifically at the quarterback position. Historically, and as long as I've been following the recruiting trail, went back and kind of looked at over the last 20 years that this South Carolina program's never recruited quarterbacks consistently at a high level. And then you look at where we are going into the 2026 class and say, hey, three of the top 10 quarterbacks in the country are very interested in going to South Carolina. And we talked about this kind of trend when Air Nolan committed to South Carolina out of the transfer portal. Hey, why did Air Nolan commit to South Carolina? Well, I think a large part had to do with he looked at the development of LaNorris Sellers, said, hey, this is a program where I can go and get developed at a high level. And so if LaNorris Sellers continues to kind of take that step and take over college football, and potentially Air Nolan comes in after him and has a lot of success, you kind of see that quarterback pipeline, if you will. And if South Carolina can get themselves there, where these kids at the high school ranks look at South Carolina and say, hey, as a quarterback, this is a program where I think I can go and get developed, that can fundamentally change where this South Carolina program is going. The best example of this to me is Ohio State. Every single year, if you get an offer from Ohio State and you're an elite quarterback, the high school ranks, you have to at least take a look at them because of the history they have with developing quarterbacks. That history for South Carolina, not totally present. Are we seeing it maybe kind of get developed with a guy like LaNorris Sellers, potentially with Aaron Nolan, and then three of these quarterbacks in the 2026 class that I'm a massive fan of? This is all to say I want to take a look at these three quarterbacks and talk about where South Carolina sits for each one of them. Talk a little bit about the prospect as well. Before we get into it, as always, to the South Carolina fans, y'all know I've had a blast talking this team, and the amount of support y'all continue to show it means the world. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. It's going to be really fun talking this program, not only in the spring practice window, but also what they are doing on the recruiting trail, because it just seems like both of these things going in the right direction really quickly. Now, I want to start with one of the biggest names in this 2026 cycle, Jared Curtis, Nashville, Tennessee. It sounds like as we speak right now, Georgia and Oregon are probably the biggest players for Jared Curtis, but South Carolina's always been there, and they're going to get an official visit from him in the summer. And what stands out to me here in terms of South Carolina's chances, we've seen South Carolina when they like a guy a lot. Think back to Nick Harbor. Think back to a guy like Dylan Stewart. When they like a prospect a lot, they will go out and do everything they can to try to get him. And now the conversation is, hey, is Jared Curtis one of those guys they want to push their chips in to go out and get? And I wouldn't argue it against it. Jared Curtis is a freaking box checker. He's 6'4", 225. Took a massive step in his junior year. Now, 6 months ago before his junior season, I like Jared Curtis because he's really big body with probably the biggest arm that you see in the 2026 class, who's an athlete that can get outside the pocket. He ain't LaNorris Sellers, but he is more than capable of extending plays and being a threat outside the pocket. What I love most is he kind of had a career completion percentage of around 55%. going into his junior year was a little bit lower than you'd probably want for a top 10 national prospect, one of the best quarterbacks in the class. That completion percentage jumps up to 70% his junior year, 40 touchdowns to 3 interceptions, 70% completion percentage. You saw him put it together from a consistency standpoint. You go back and look at his sophomore film, you go back and look at his freshman film. This kid from an arm talent level, there's just not many quarterbacks that can match it. His deep ball is probably the best deep ball that you see in this 2026 class from what I've seen so far. There's a lot of high upside with a guy like Jared Curtis. You wanted to see him be a little bit more of a consistent passer. That 70% completion percentage, that was what we were looking for to go along with 40 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. Jared Curtis, really, really good quarterback prospect, and we'll kind of see how it works out with South Carolina over the next couple of weeks. Another name that I really like, and personally, and this is not a shot at Jared Curtis, I think this might be the best fit for South Carolina. Landon Duckworth, who was actually committed to South Carolina way back in the summer of 2023. I remember breaking down his freshman year film when he committed and said this makes sense that South Carolina went after this kid early. Now he's decommitted from South Carolina, but it seems like that season that we just saw from LaNorris Sellers has kind of maybe changed the narrative a little bit about Landon Duckworth and says, hey, one, they kind of Landon Duckworth is not built like LaNorris Sellers, but is the athlete that LaNorris Sellers is. I bet Landon Duckworth looked at all the success that LaNorris Sellers had and how well South Carolina put an offense around LaNorris Sellers and said, hey, maybe I come back to South Carolina and kind of take a look again. And it sounds like that's what's happening. There are a lot of programs that are in it for a guy like Landon Duckworth, and rightfully so, but South Carolina has put themselves right in that mix. You look at Landon Duckworth, 51 total touchdowns his junior year with the 66% completion percentage, juiced up athlete. Very similar to how we saw LaNorris Sellers be, for lack of better terms, a Houdini in the pocket and just making people miss and extending plays. Landon Duckworth does a very, very similar thing. Really good at extending, very good running the football. He has the long speed, but it's also like elite short area. He looks like a wide receiver when he gets out in space. As a ball carrier, he's a very, very natural athlete, 3-sport athlete, basketball and track and field with a lot of arm talent. And what I like about Landon Duckworth is he can throw the fastball if he wants to, but he also layers the football exceptionally well. And that's normally something that you don't see from high school kids. A lot of these high school quarterbacks coming out, they know one speed, and they're just going to throw it a million miles per hour and just throw rockets because they can, and they're really talented. When you get to the SEC, when you get to the college football landscape, especially at the top of the college football landscape, you can't just throw fastballs. You have to be able to layer the football, and Landon Duckworth has shown that ability to do so over those early years at the high school ranks. Really good fit in the South Carolina offense, but also a guy that is dripping with talent, and he's also dripping with confidence. Almost too much confidence at times. Some of the throws that he decided to make his junior year, he knows he can make them, and he made a lot of them. And there's probably going to be that battle between, hey, we're going to get you into South Carolina and say, hey, we don't want you to not be confident. When there's an opportunity to go make a big-time throw, go make it. But also, we don't have to be putting the ball in harm's way as much as maybe Landon Duckworth did his junior year. Really like this kid. Last one, Brady Smigiel. Brady Smigiel, a little bit less of an extender of plays, more of I'm a really big body with a really big arm that's going to sit in the pocket and just absolutely distribute. Extremely productive. That's probably where you start with Brady Smigiel. Over the last 3 years of high school football, it's over 11,000 yards, 147 touchdowns to 28 interceptions. He's a coach's son. He has put up insane numbers in the state of California over the last couple of years, and you love that because you're looking at, hey, how do you translate to the collegiate ranks? All that reps, all of that production that he has coming out of high school, that's going to matter for Brady coming to the high school ranks. Now, you look at Brady Smigiel, there are some West Coast teams in there. There's Michigan in there. There's also South Carolina in there. South Carolina's getting an official visit. This is all to say that when's the last time? And, Jared Curtis, Landon Duckworth, Brady Smigiel all have about top 6 schools that they're looking at. When's the last time we've seen South Carolina make a top six for three different top 10 quarterbacks in one recruiting cycle? I can't remember a time that that's happened. And so to me, I look at it, and what I might add to that is it sounds like South Carolina is going to have a very good shot at all three of these kids. What stands out to me is when's that happened before? And I think for South Carolina fans, what you're most excited about is you're seeing a fundamental change in perception in terms of how these high school quarterbacks view South Carolina. South Carolina's never been a program, at least in my opinion, and y'all can correct me if I'm wrong. It's never been a program that elite quarterbacks have said, "Hey, we got to check out South Carolina." South Carolina's been in it for some really good quarterbacks, has actually landed the commitments of some really good quarterbacks, but they've never consistently been that program that you need to go look at, like in Ohio State, like a team like Oregon's kind of looking like this as well. This is the most exciting storyline for me. Is, hey, can we start bringing in and really competing for some of the top quarterbacks from the high school ranks, building that quarterback pipeline through the high school ranks? It's huge. And you look at all the best programs, especially the programs who've been really good as late, teams like Texas, teams like Ohio State, they have that quarterback pipeline. So even when they lose a guy like Quinn Ewers, you have a guy like Arch Manning waiting in the wings. Even when you lose a guy like Will Howard, you have Julian Sain or Tavian St. Clair for Ohio State. Can South Carolina get there? To me, we're kind of seeing them maybe get there, which I think is exciting. We'll see how it works out. Again, getting into the month of March, this is when things start to be a little bit more clear in terms of how the quarterback dominoes are going to fall. And that's not to mention, that's not to ignore that South Carolina is doing a really good job at a lot of other positions, specifically the offensive line, which I think is the most important position to make sure you get right out of the high school ranks. And Shane Beamer's certainly done that the last couple of years. We'll sign out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. A lot of spring practice talk, a lot of high school recruiting talk over the next couple of weeks and months. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.